What are the three questions facing the Alabama Crimson Tide as we head into spring practice? I'm going to tell you right after the stinger. It's Felix Sharpe at Sharpe Review on Twitter for CampusToCanton.com. If you like this video, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel so you never miss any of the content that we're dropping. And if you are a college football fan and you aren't familiar with what a Campus to Canton fantasy football league is, I encourage you to do a little bit of research and then subscribing to the website, CampusToCanton.com. Let's talk about Alabama. It's just a team that never has questions. It just reloads. It doesn't rebuild. It just adds these 5 stars and just keeps on trucking along. They lose to Georgia in the national championship game, and the momentum really swings after Jamison Williams goes out with an injury. And so that's where we're going to start with the first question facing Alabama is how will that wide receiver room shake out? You lose John Mechie, Slade Bolden, Jamison Williams, Brian Robinson, Jaleel Billingsley. All of those guys, all of the leading pass catchers for Alabama are gone. And I think we know somewhat how this is going to shake out. Ja'Cory Brooks replaced John Mechie after he was injured in 2021, so we would expect him to resume that role in 2022. There were high expectations for freshman JoJo Earl, who's probably going to be a slot wide receiver. He commanded early playing time in 2021 before being injured. I think he just replaces one-for-one Slade Bolden. Then there's the drama. The drama is at that X position where you have Jermaine Burton, the transfer in from Georgia, and a Guy Hall. Jermaine Burton brings the speed, and that's something that without Burton on the field, Alabama doesn't really have, at least at the wide receiver position. And Nick Saban, when he brings in transfers, they play. So I think that Jermaine Burton is going to be the starter. I think we see a Jai Hall in some sort of reserve role. And then the question is, what happens with Hall? He was the freshman wide receiver that everyone was raving about after the 2021 spring game. He had a couple of big questions in that game, but then you see in 2021 he's firmly behind Brooks Earl, and even Christian Leary got more playing time than Hall, at least early on in the season. And so does a Guy Hall transfer after this season? He's a very emotional player. If you pay attention to his Twitter timeline, very emotional player. Is he not satisfied with his role in that wide receiver room after the spring, and does he decide to transfer? Question 2 is who is going to rush the passer other than Will Anderson? Alabama is losing Fedarian Mathis and his 9 sacks to the NFL. They also lose Christian Harris, who had 5.3, including 3 in the national championship game. He's gone to the NFL. 5-star linebacker athlete Drew Sanders is in the transfer portal, landing with Arkansas. But Alabama absolutely needs to rush the passer. If you think about how good that Alabama defense is year in and year out, well, in 2021, they ranked just 50th in the country in passing yards allowed, and that includes giving up almost 300 yards to Zach Calzada against Texas A&M, who they obviously lost to. Had no sacks, none in the Texas A&M game. And then you look at the national championship game. Stetson Bennett, very efficient, 17 for 26, 224 yards and 2 touchdowns. They were able to pressure him, but I don't know that the defense was necessarily disruptive. And so that Alabama defensive line got to come back, got to be able to rush the passer next season. They do have returning Dallas Turner, who had 8.5 sacks as a true freshman. It's just they're just ridiculous. And then Henry To'o at inside linebacker, who had 4 himself. The number one question facing Alabama headed into the spring is, what does Jamir Gibbs mean to this team, and what could this season mean for Jamir Gibbs? This is going to be a mutually beneficial relationship. When you look at that Alabama roster, not including Jamir Gibbs, they don't have a lot of explosive players. Well, what does Nick Saban do? He goes into the transfer portal and he gets either the top or the top 3 back in the country, depending on who you're asking. Now, what would a dominant season mean for Gibbs? I think it could potentially mean first-round draft capital when you're talking about a player who could catch 50 passes, and in different types of ways he could be deployed vertically in the passing game as a running back. And then in addition to putting up, maybe 1,000, 1,200 yards rushing, I think we could absolutely see, with a dominant season, Jamir Gibbs getting first-round draft capital in 2023. Alabama allowed 37 sacks last year. That was 110th in the country. And so maybe the quick passing game with Jamir Gibbs helps get the ball out of Bryce Young's hands a little bit quicker. Alabama's A-Day, the spring game, set to take place on April 16th this year. September 3rd, week 1 of the college football season, they take on Utah State. And then the game that everyone is going to circle, week 2, September 10th, they take on Steve Sarkisian and Texas. That Texas team with Quinn Ewers and Isaiah Nayor and Bijan Robinson. There's going to be a lot of eyes on that Texas-Alabama game. But let me know in the comments what you think. Where does Alabama need to improve this spring? All right.